It's a stormy night, and most living creatures are indoors, seeking shelter from the weather. In a cozy room, a woman named Cassia stands by the window, gazing out at the fierce storm raging outside. As she turns around, surprise and confusion fill her face. To her shock, she discovers a man lying on the bed, seemingly asleep. Curious, she walks over to him and watches quietly for a moment. Yet, she has no idea who he is. Her cheeks flush with warmth as she takes in just how striking he looks, especially his muscular body. This stranger doesn't even seem fully human. Unable to resist the urge, Cassia reaches out to touch his face. Just then, his eyes spring open, revealing stunning golden irises. He grabs her hand halfway to his face and sits up in bed, looking at her with a mix of confusion and wonder. That seems to be happening a lot tonight. He asks if he is dreaming because what he sees is so unusual. Despite his confusion, Cassia can't seem to look away from his body. All she can think about is how sensual his voice sounds. Still somewhat dazed, he tells her that she looks familiar and wonders if they've met before or if she is just a figment of his imagination brought on by too much wine. It seems he has been drinking all night. Cassia doesn't respond verbally. Instead, she leans in closer, intending to kiss him, but once again, he stops her. He tells her that she must be a dream because no woman would dare to approach him so casually, let alone try to kiss him. However, he doesn't pull back. He keeps his hands gently cradling her face as if he wants to hold on to this moment. Cassia asks why he just said that, and he seems taken aback that she speaks. In a swift movement, he grabs her hand and flips her over, now hovering above her with a delighted grin. He's curious to know what more she would say, but Cassia simply gazes up at him, refusing to respond. He waits for her to say something, but when he realizes she won't, he shrugs and reassures her that it's okay, and she doesn't have to speak. Cassia, feeling bold, moves her hand toward the belt of his robe. He calls her a brazen mistress for touching him so carelessly, and she can't help but secretly agree with him. This man must know what she wants, and her cheeks flush with warmth as she wonders if he wants the same thing. The mysterious man tells her that if she is merely a dream, then he supposes they share the same desires. He adds that if she feels unhappy at any moment, she should wake him up with her voice. They soon find themselves lost in each other's embrace as they get intimate. As they connect, Cassia's mind drifts to poems and sonnets that beautifully describe the bond between two lovers seeking each other's warmth. Such moments are truly lovely, like the way a butterfly delicately lands on a fresh bouquet of flowers in the spring. As she loses herself in their intimate moments, she closes her eyes, picturing lovely things like butterflies and blooming flowers. Suddenly, the man leans closer and asks if she is ready for the finale. His voice is teasing when he says he hopes she tastes as good as she feels. With that, he opens his mouth to reveal sharp fangs and sinks them into her neck. Cassia jerks awake, sitting up abruptly in her bed, her heart racing. She looks around her dimly lit bedroom and realizes she is completely alone. Everything that just occurred seems to have been nothing more than a vivid dream. She reminds herself that she really needs to stop reading so many romance comics. It seems unbelievable that she just had an intimate dream about a vampire. How pathetic. She thinks as she covers her face with her hands. However, we see a glowing red symbol where the vampire had bitten her in the dream. Just what kind of dream can leave a mark like that? The next day, the scene opens up at Max Corp, a bustling workplace where several people move about, each busy with their various tasks. In the ladies' bathroom, two women are engaged in a lively conversation about the Intel division, which will soon be hiring interns. The first woman expresses her hope of getting her niece a position at the company, emphasizing that it would be such a fantastic opportunity for her. Her companion nods in agreement and shares that her brother would genuinely benefit from landing a position like that. She believes it would make his resume stand out as he approaches graduation next year. Her friend responds with excitement, admitting that one of the guys on the hiring team owes her a significant favor. She feels that her niece might have a real shot at the internship, especially since college hasn't been going well for her, and she could use the boost. Her companion then relates her experience, confessing that college didn't go smoothly for her either. She reveals that her father helped her secure this job, Without his connections, she jokes that the only position she could have hoped for would be as a janitor. Both women burst into laughter, momentarily lifting the air of competition and anxiety surrounding the internship. Just then, the sound of a flushing toilet interrupts the moment, and Cassia emerges from a stall, holding a toilet brush. She greets the two women, but they watch her with a hint of discomfort, refusing to respond as they begin to walk away. As they exit, the first woman expresses her disbelief at the situation, claiming how embarrassing it is to encounter a janitor at such a moment. She questions her friend if all janitors don't usually work the night shift. Her companion, glancing back at Cassia as they leave, points out the custodial cart parked nearby, wondering how they both missed it. Cassia watches them go, remaining silent and reflective. As she glances at her reflection in the mirror, she notices that a spot on her neck still looks red. Sighing to herself, she decides she'll speak with her landlord about the bedbugs again. Then she continues scratching at the irritated spot on her neck. Later that day, we see her sitting on the rooftop, chatting with her friend Meg. Meg is bugging her about the dream, declaring it entirely unfair that Cassia would casually mention dreaming about a hot vampire without diving into the juicy details. Finally giving in, Cassia asks Meg what specifics she wants to know. If she is just interested in the exciting parts, or if she'd prefer a full recounting. Meg eagerly replies that she would like to know everything. She reminds Cassia that she is in the process of writing a fantasy novel for web cartoons and needs inspiration. Our female lead exhales deeply, finally giving in to her friend's curiosity. She begins describing how the dream starts in the vampire's room, where he lies sleeping in a luxurious bed. As she recounts the experience, she describes how she reaches out to touch him because he's beautiful. Furthermore, she reveals that he grabbed her hand and they engaged in a little chit-chat. Then she pauses and gives Meg a knowing look. Meg's excitement builds up as she begs for more details because she knows they did it in the dream. Cassia shrugs and admits that she didn't say much. She reveals that they both just wanted to do it, and so they did. At this point, Meg is fully invested. She asks if the experience was really good, and Cassia replies that it was, trying to act nonchalant. Meg keeps asking for more details. Just as Cassia begins to speak, her mustard pops into her eyes, forcing her to abruptly stop mid-sentence. Meg scolds her, as she mentions that it's the third time it has happened this week. She tells Cassia that she really ought to let her open one of those for her. Our female lead grumbles, reminding her friend that while she may be 10 years younger, she is not a child. She protests that she can open her mustard, and she struggles to wipe the substance from her eyes. At that moment, the door clicks open, and Sean walks in, catching them mid-conversation. He informs Meg that her break ended 2 minutes ago and tells her to return to work. Turning to Cassia, he adds that she has toilet paper stuck to her shoe, before reminding her that her break will also be over in 2 minutes. As he shuts the door, Meg makes a face, calling Sean a slave driver, while continues to eat her snack. Cassia rolls her eyes before suggesting to Meg that she should just hook up with him already. She says it's exhausting watching all the romantic tension between them. Meg retaliates by flipping Cassia the finger and cussing her out. In response, Cassia dares her friend to prove that she is lying. Once again, she pops the mustard into her eyes, and Meg bursts out laughing as she declares that karma is real. With a playful tone, she claims that she would rather throw herself down a never-ending staircase than date Sean. As she rises to leave, Meg smirks and adds that this isn't over. She'll text Cassia later for more details about that bizarre dream she shared. Cassia, rolling her eyes, tells her friend to go get a life and asks her to hand over a napkin. She further reminds Meg that she needs to get back to work, playfully teasing her that Sean would spank her otherwise if she doesn't. In response, Meg cusses her out once more before striding away. Later that night, the rain pours outside, casting a gloomy atmosphere over Max Corp. Most employees have left for the day, but a few security personnel patrol the building, ensuring everything is in order. We see a lone janitor working late, diligently cleaning the floors. Cassia pushes her cart toward an office door emblazoned with the name tag of Xavier Mathis. She clutches a key card that bears the man's name and photo, With a deep breath, she swipes the keycard to unlock the door, entering the office. Once inside, she walks over to Xavier's computer, her heart racing as she inputs the password into the system. A shiver runs through her, and she mentally scolds herself to stay composed. She reminds herself that she did not steal a man's keycard just to back out at this critical moment. The stakes are high, and she knows why she is here, although the memory from that rainy night remains frustratingly out of reach. Cassia concentrates, desperately trying to recall a bit from that night, but her mind stays stubbornly blank. With renewed determination, she mutters under her breath that all she has done leads to this single moment, and her fate hangs on whether she gets caught or not. Bracing herself, she carefully inputs a name into the search bar, her heart pounding as she prepares to uncover secrets. The search results yield an overwhelming 40,374 entries. Cassia, determined to narrow down her options, types in her name along with Penrose Avenue and February. This focused search brings up 375 results that perfectly match her inquiry. Eager to keep this valuable information, she decides to copy the items onto a USB drive. However, she is upset to see that the estimated time to complete the transfer is 2 hours and 31 minutes. Unfortunately, patience is the only option left to her, as she knows she cannot afford to abandon the operation now. Determined to wait it out, she remains in the office, diligently watching the progress bar inch its way forward. After enduring a whole 2 hours, she suddenly begins to hear voices approaching in the hallway. 2 security guards are engaged in a light conversation about trivial matters as they patrol the area. Cassia's heart races and a cold sweat breaks out across her forehead. One of the guards glances toward Xavier's office and notices that the light is still on inside. His curiosity gets the better of him, and he decides to come over and investigate the situation. Meanwhile, Cassia feels the tension mount, completely aware that she still has 18 minutes left before the files finish copying onto the USB drive. The security guard, Pete, throws open the door and walks in. He looks around and sees a caution sign on the floor, warning about a slippery surface. Cassia has already prepared a cover story and positioned herself next to the desk with her mop, pretending to clean the floor. When the man recognizes her, he becomes surprised and calls out her name. She lifts her head and tells him to watch his step because the floor is wet. He gently asks her if she is working late. Our guilty female lead replies that she is running behind and will be finishing up her rounds soon before heading out. The security man warns her that he has heard there will be another bad storm tonight, so she shouldn't be out there in it. Then he asks her if she would like some help because he really needs to lock up Xavier's office. Cassia thinks for a moment and tells him that it probably wouldn't be necessary because she would be finishing up soon. Pete says it's okay, but then he suddenly points out that Xavier's office is always locked. Curious, he asks Cassia if she usually cleans this office. In response, she informs him that she has been on autopilot since her lunch break and doesn't think she normally cleans the office. She quickly glances at the computer screen and realizes she has only 4 minutes left to finish copying the files. However, Pete is not finished with his line of questioning. He asks her if she has noticed anything out of the ordinary. Our female lead confidently replies that she hasn't. Yet, the security guard appears increasingly worried as he tells her that the office is a pretty restricted area, and it is unusual for the door to be unlocked, especially at night. Sensing trouble, Cassia pulls out the USB drive, and the system displays an error message because the files have not yet finished copying. As Pete continues to stare at the door confused, he asks her if she just found the door open. She tells him that she did indeed find it open, but hadn't thought much about it. With that, she drops the USB hard drive into her pocket and quickly unplugs the computer. To hasten his exit, she reminds Pete to mind his step because she's out of caution signs. In light of the information about the office being restricted, she adds that it's probably a good idea for her to wrap up her cleaning now, as she would rather not give the wrong impression. Pete abruptly turns and fixes his gaze on her, and she feels a cold sweat break out across her forehead, wondering if he is about to call her bluff. However, Instead of confronting her, he simply points out that she has a little toilet paper stuck on her shoe. Finally, our female lead lets out a sigh of relief, grateful that Pete decided not to pursue his suspicions any further. He wishes her a good night, and she wishes him the same before he leaves the room. As the storm rages on outside at night, Cassia makes her way back home, a small piece of tissue stuck to her shoe. She feels a mix of relief and anxiety. While she is glad to have escaped a troublesome situation, she can't shake off the feeling that things could have gone better. Even though she did manage to gather the important information, she looked guilty as sin when Pete came in. The thought weighs heavily on her, and she has a sinking feeling that she is definitely going to get caught. Feeling overwhelmed, she screams into her sheets on the bed, trying to release some built-up tension. Amidst her complex thoughts, her phone pings, snapping her back to reality. She checks her notifications to find 4 messages from Meg, who is checking in to see if she's okay. Meg's text messages are a blend of concern and curiosity, asking Cassia not only if she's all right, but also prompting her to finish narrating the dream they had discussed earlier. Exhausted and feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders, Cassia types back a quick reply, assuring Meg that she's all right, just worn out from a long day. She promises to fill Meg in during their lunch break tomorrow. Once she plugs her phone into the charger, Cassia allows her mind to wander, planning the actions she will take in the morning. The first thing on her agenda is to arrive at work before anyone else, so she'll have the opportunity to slide the key card under Xavier's office door. This way, no one would suspect her of being involved, and she would be able to escape further questioning. Once she has executed this plan, she intends to head to the library, where she can test the USB drive in one of their computers to see if anything was copied from her earlier encounter. She knows that to carry out her plans seamlessly, she must get some sleep. Tomorrow will be demanding, and she can't afford to get into any more trouble. 5 a.m. comes early. Reminding herself to be patient, she holds on to the hope that all her questions will finally be answered, hopefully tomorrow. With that reassuring thought, she falls asleep, and the storm continues to rage outside. A few moments later, she opens her eyes and finds herself back in the vampire's room. Confusion washes over her as she wonders if she is experiencing the same dream again. However, our female lead is in for a surprise because this time around, he is waiting for her. Cassia turns around at the sound of his voice as he calls her mistress and greets her with a casual hello. With a flick of his finger, he beckons her forward, and she feels herself getting lifted off her feet, floating effortlessly as she moves to meet him. A smile crosses his lips as he notices the surprise on her face. Her eyes widen as she glances down to discover that she is trapped within a glowing circle. Taking stock of her surroundings, she wonders if this is some form of magic. A brief thought crosses her mind as she notes her friend Meg would certainly find this development entertaining for her story. The vampire regards her with an amused expression, explaining that the circle serves as a precautionary measure. He mentions that she does not appear to be very guarded. With a disappointed tone, he tells her that she possesses enough power to seduce him and vanish without a trace, only to return once again, yet with no means of protecting herself. Sighing, he shakes his head, as if deeming her foolish for her lack of caution. After a moment of contemplation, Cassia gathers her thoughts and asks the vampire if he remembers her. Despite the surprising nature of her current situation, she is convinced that he is indeed the same person from her last dream. Yet, a cloud of confusion lingers in her mind because this feels like a continuation of that dream. And when has such a thing ever occurred in history? The vampire looks at her in disbelief as he asks Cassia if she had expected him to forget her. His eyes take on a dark look as he reassures her that he won't be forgetting her so soon. He says he had actually presumed himself to be dreaming last night, but Cassia's presence here now reassures him that she is indeed very much real and that what they did was also undeniably real. She teases him, asking if he wants to go again, and he bursts out laughing. He responds, saying it's not likely, so she shouldn't push her luck. Likewise, he tells her that she successfully seduced him once, but that would be the only time she would toy with him. Cassia's cheeks flush as she thinks about the conflicting emotions she's feeling. She is both terrified and aroused at the same time. Moving on, the vampire asks her who sent her, probing further for her name. She tells him her name and adds that he can continue calling her Mistress because she enjoys it when he uses that title. He acknowledges her boldness, calling her fearless, and asks why she has come to him. In response, she playfully asks if he questions every woman who seeks to visit his bed. She states that her reasons for coming here are quite obvious, gaining a response from him in which he calls her a reckless girl. He seems to contemplate for a while, and then he declares she is amusing. With a flick of his fingers, she suddenly finds herself slamming to the floor, kneeling before him. The shock of his unexpected display of power leaves her momentarily speechless. She is surprised to see that he can use magic so freely, and the realization adds another layer of confusion to the situation. As she kneels there, she secretly wonders if his sudden use of magic without warning means that he sees her as a threat. The vampire tells her that he has been trying to figure out exactly what she is, yet he has had no luck. He claims that whoever she is or whomever she serves must be powerful. However, it appears they are not powerful enough to evade the spells he has been casting since her arrival. Cassia asks him if that is the reason she can't move. She explains that she wasn't trying to leave and suggests he might be wasting his time casting spells, as she is in no hurry to escape him. He replies with a tone of condescension that she doesn't seem to understand who she is dealing with. Curious about his identity, she asks him to enlighten her. Then, she queries whether he is some kind of vampire prince. At this, he hisses, clearly irritated. He says that by calling him a prince, she mocks him. Refusing to give up, Cassia presses further, asking if he is a king or a god. He chuckles softly at her audacity. He gets in her personal space, and he begins to twist a strand of her hair around his slender fingers. Furthermore, he tells her that she is toying with him and warns that he is not someone to be trifled with. Likewise, he leans closer and asks whether she truly seeks to anger the Demon King of Vampires. Cassia's cheeks flush a deep shade of red. With a mocking tone, she offers an apology, addressing him as Your Majesty, before bursting into laughter. She adds that regardless of his title, he should know that she is only interested in one thing. He raises an eyebrow and asks her what that singular desire might be. Playfully, she teases that she would show him, but his magic spells have rendered her immobile. The vampire narrows his eyes. He explains that if he removes his seal, she might just disappear, and he can't have his prisoner running off into the night. Cassia shrugs, suggesting that it seems neither of them will get what they are after. However, the vampire appears to be confident. He informs her that he already has her in his grasp and has acquired what he desires. She smirks and teasingly proposes that he could have so much more, all of her, if he wanted. The vampire admits that he understands what she's suggesting, but he reveals that he doesn't trust her just yet. With a look of triumph on her face, she tells him to try harder next time. And with that, the sound of her alarm brings her back to reality. She glances at her phone screen and sees that the time is already 8:20 a.m. A wave of disappointment washes over her, and she slaps her forehead in frustration, realizing that she has overslept once again. She wonders just how many times she must have hit the snooze button while lost in her dreams. But then, she takes a deep breath and reassures herself that if she hurries, she might still be able to get the key card into Xavier's office before he arrives at 9. Several minutes later, Cassia successfully arrives at Max Corp. She quickly changed into her janitorial uniform and begins pushing her cart through the sleek, sterile hallways. As she approaches Xavier's office door, she lets out a tense breath for what she's about to do. Then, with a quick movement, she drops the key card next to the floor and blocks the view with her cart. Checking to make sure no one is looking, she then uses her shoe to kick it under the door. Then she begins to walk away, desperate to put as much distance between her and the door. Just as she thinks she has managed to slip away unnoticed, the door swings open, and a tall man steps out. He calls out to her, requesting for her name, and she turns around, her heart racing. Standing before her is a man with a striking resemblance to the photo on the keycard. It is Xavier Mathis in person. He is holding out the keycard she just dropped, and the look he's giving her is cool and assessing. Cassia breaks out in a cold sweat as her mind begins racing with questions. She wonders if he knows she is the one responsible for his missing card. In the next scene, we see Xavier sitting across from Cassia, sipping his coffee. The time is now 9:02 a.m. Cassia clasps her hands nervously, glancing down as beads of sweat continue to roll down her face and neck. After appearing satisfied with his sip of coffee, Xavier decides to break the silence. He addresses Cassia directly, reminding her that she claims to have seen a card lying on the ground outside his office door and that she simply kicked it inside. She hurriedly agrees with him, insisting that she was fortunate to have noticed it. She adds that the name on the card matched the name on his office door, which piqued her interest. However, Xavier questions her about why she didn't knock on the door and hand the card over to him personally. Her face flushes as she stutters, searching for a reasonable explanation. She explains that it was around 8:58 a.m., and the shift starts at 9 a.m., so she didn't expect anyone would be inside the office. Furthermore, she tries to brush off his intense questioning by saying the conversation would have happened either way, but she has got places to be. She quickly adds that she's not trying to make herself look less incriminating, and she gets up to leave. However, Xavier calmly tells her to stay seated, and she nervously retakes her seat. He proceeds to explain that his computer was unplugged this morning, which is unusual because he ordinarily does not unplug his monitor. When he rebooted it, he discovered that there had been a system crash. He then informs her that he used a coworker's keycard for assistance and found that the last thing his computer searched for was Cassia Penrose Avenue, February. With sarcasm, Xavier asks our female lead if she doesn't find all of this peculiar. Then he tells her to imagine his surprise at finding that there is indeed a person working in this facility by the name of Cassia Penrose. Furthermore, he inquires if she knows such a person. This time, Cassia looks up at him when she responds. She informs him that she is not great with names and does not see how this pertains to her. In response, Xavier casually picks up a paper lying on his desk and displays a printout of her passport, including her name and occupation within the company. She gives him a tight smile as she tells him that this is probably a weird coincidence. Nevertheless, he remains calm. He states that, for future reference, he arrives at the office a full hour early every morning, so if she discreetly wishes to return his keycard, she should please do so before 8 a.m. Cassia swallows hard and looks away, acutely aware that she has been caught. Despite this, she tries to play it off nonchalantly, insisting that she doesn't know what happened in Xavier's office last night, but there must be a simple explanation for it somewhere else. He cuts her short, firmly stating that the security guard on duty, Pete, had mentioned that a janitor was working late in the building last night. To her dismay, the security guard had named the janitor as Cass. Inwardly, Cassia feels a wave of panic wash over her. She silently tells herself that the game is over and she is going to jail. Eventually, Xavier lets out a long sigh. He informs Cassia that he will be honest with her. While he acknowledges that her search might have been innocent enough, all things considered, he points out that she deliberately stole his key card, though he is still baffled about how she managed to do that. Furthermore, she gained access to top-secret records, an infraction that could lead to a prison sentence of at least 5 to 10 years. However, Xavier adds that he is willing to overlook this serious breach if she agrees to explain her search to him. He emphasizes that it is her choice. She can either provide a satisfactory explanation or stay put and wait while he calls security, which would result in her spending the night in a considerably less cozy cell. He looks at her, letting the weight of his words settle between them, clarifying that the outcome of this situation rests entirely in her hands. Cassia clasps her hands nervously and begins to stammer. She tells Xavier that she doesn't know who she is and that she doesn't remember anything from before 6 months ago. Her first memory is of Penrose Avenue, and all she knows is that she is called Cassia. Xavier chuckles and tells her that she is an interesting case. He adds that if he hadn't already conducted a background check on her, he would have likely accused her of lying just now. However, he informs her that her story checks out. He then reveals the details of his background search. Cassia Penrose, diagnosed with amnesia on February 2nd of this year. It's fascinating because no further information exists about her before that date. After that date, however, she was admitted to Sanctuary Haven House for rehabilitation on February 4th and subsequently relocated to Highland Apartments and Ryland Staffing Agency, which helped her secure a job here at Max Corp. Xavier notes that it's quite a coincidence for her to get a job in a building with the largest collection of classified personal records in the country. He admits that he suspects everything is intentional, and that, in all honesty, the information that exists about her might be really incriminating. However, he says that he is invested at this point and asks her if she needs help. She nods, unable to speak. He then tells her that she should please allow him to assist her. After a brief pause, he asks her why she would risk everything for such a simple search inquiry in his database. She bites her lip and clasps her hands tightly for a moment before finally speaking. She notifies him that she supposes there is no reason to keep this to herself at this point, especially since Xavier has her in a difficult position. Addressing him formally as Mr. Mathis, she continues, explaining that from the moment she stared up at the Penrose Avenue signpost on that rainy morning, she had not given up hope in searching for answers. Although everyone keeps dismissing her efforts, she remains determined in her pursuit. She expresses her willingness to risk nearly anything to uncover the truth, to find her relatives, and ultimately to feel a sense of belonging. This desire drives her forward, and she asks him if he understands what she is saying. He responds, assuring her that he understands perfectly, acknowledging that her quest is a noble cause, just as he had suspected. He adds that this is why he wants to help her. Her eyes widen in surprise. He continues, explaining that to assist her, she would need to be very transparent with him. He tells her that if she wishes to uncover her past, locate her relatives, and discover her truth, then they would need to work together. She looks at him questioningly and asks why he would want to help her at all. He responds that it's a hero complex. He simply enjoys helping people. He further explains that life is too short to go about business as usual, and it is much richer when people can help one another. He pauses, trying to get her reaction, and asks if his words make sense to her. Cassia cautiously replies that she supposes they do, but she admits that she is unsure about what he could gain from this whole thing. She explains that she feels she has everything to lose or to gain from their collaboration, but then trails off, leaving the question hanging in the air. Xavier senses her hesitation and gently urges her to take him at his word, expressing that he hopes she can trust that there is some goodness left in the world. He continues by stating that regardless of her doubts, he doesn't stand to gain anything from helping a janitor who is down on her luck. He emphasizes that she has nothing to offer him in return, urging her to allow him to take on this challenge for her sake. After all, as he mentioned earlier, he genuinely enjoys helping people. Taking a moment to consider his words, Cassia finally stands up and stretches forth her hand to shake his. With a grateful smile, she thanks him and formally addresses him as Mr. Mathis. He shakes her hand warmly and insists that she should simply call him Xavier. Then, he expresses his enthusiasm about their partnership, stating that he looks forward to working with her in the search for her family. Cassia responds that she hopes it will indeed be possible. As their handshake breaks, he nods reassuringly and says that he will be in touch soon. Later that evening, we see Cassia chatting with Meg, who seems to be obsessing over Cassia's dreams. Meg can't get over the fact that the same guy appears in 2 consecutive dreams. With a smile, she claims it's too bad he would rather not get intimate again, and she bursts into laughter at the thought. After a moment, she admits that she feels a bit of jealousy. Even without the intimacy, she wishes she had some kind of love life to speak of, even if it's entirely imaginary. Cassia nods in understanding, replying that she too would prefer a real-life romance, but she's willing to take what she can get at this point. With a playful tone, she expresses her desire for a real-life version of the vampire from her dreams to come along and sweep her off her feet. Meg teases her, asking if she's now on a first-name basis with the Vampire King. Cassia chuckles and explains that she did tell him her name, but he withheld his. Nonetheless, she feels that the name Gray suits the vampire perfectly, so that's what she decides to call him. Meg laughs and encourages her to call him whatever she wants. She playfully adds that Cassia should just make sure to keep her updated when they get intimate again. Cassia rolls her eyes and tells Meg that she really needs to find herself a boyfriend. With a smirk, Meg responds, telling Cassia to go ahead and find one first. As the two women stroll past a bright yellow car parked by the roadside, they don't notice Xavier sitting inside. At the moment, Xavier seems to be facing his own problems inside his car. He's on a phone call with his mother, who is nagging him. She complains that he's always so busy working too much and that she feels like she never sees him anymore. She asks him if it would really be so much to take it easy, go on a vacation, and date a girl. Frustrated, Xavier puts his head in his hand and tells his mother that he is well aware of how busy he is. However, he explains that if he plans to get a promotion, putting in these extra hours is necessary. He adds that he has just left the office late and has barely had time to grab a little supper. His mother interrupts him, telling him that he's going to walk himself right into an early grave. She asks what all this working is for and complains that she gets no grandchildren. She says she barely has a son at all and continues to nag him, asking when the last time was that he made a visit. Likewise, she reminds him that it was 3 years ago at Christmas. Not only that, but she expresses her concern, stating it has been far too long and wishes he would at least consider visiting his father, who has been asking about him. Furthermore, she adds that his father's health is worsening and that he is also asking about grandchildren. As she continues to rant, Xavier feels exhausted. He looks up, interrupts her, and tells her that he should let her go because something has come up. She sighs and asks if it's work again, but he assures her it's not work and that he will call her later. She complains that he always promises to call back later, but then weeks will go by. Likewise, she mentions to him that one day, when he becomes a parent, he will understand her suffering. Quickly, he says goodbye and ends the call, feeling frustrated and annoyed. He hurriedly opens his car door and calls out to Cassia, addressing her formally as Miss Penrose. She turns in surprise to see him. He tells her that he thought he saw her and asks if she doesn't drive to work. She replies that she doesn't, but she thought he would know better than anyone, considering all the research he did on her. Xavier apologizes for having come down hard on her. In his defense, he informs her that she put his security clearance and, thereby, his job at greater risk with her actions. Cassia immediately apologizes, saying she should have guessed as much and that she didn't consider the risks to anyone aside from herself. She apologizes to Xavier for putting him at risk. In response, Xavier suggests that since they would be working together to find her relatives, they should hit the reset button. She asks him what he means, and he explains that they have gotten off to a really rocky start. He proposes that it might be in their best interest to just start over. Nobody owes anything to the other. No debts, just a clean slate. He asks her how it sounds, and she tells him that he is being a little too generous. She points out that he still has every right to send her to jail because she targeted him for his clearance, and she knew the risks he faced. Therefore, she deserves jail time. Xavier agrees that it's true, but says he would still like to help her. Cassia expresses her confusion, asking why he would want to help her after what she did. Instead of arguing on the street, Xavier suggests they go somewhere a little more private, like a bistro, because he's starving. Several moments later, they find themselves in a bistro with Cassia seated across from Xavier. She tells him that she's not a charity case and that he doesn't have to take her out to dinner and pay for her. However, he replies that he wants to, and he asks her to please allow him that much at least. Then he begins questioning her. He states he knows that she started at the company deliberately, but there is still one thing he hasn't figured out. He asks her how she managed to steal his keycard the previous day. Cassia looks uncomfortable for a moment before explaining that when she started there, she volunteered to work in the part of the building that houses the Intel division. Over time, she noticed there was only one person with a top-secret clearance who stayed late every day, Xavier. She describes how she knows that he likes the temperature of his room set to 71 degrees Fahrenheit and that he keeps his key card in his jacket pocket. Around the end of his shift yesterday, she cranked up the heat to 76 degrees. She waited for him to remove his jacket and exit the room to fix the thermostat, and at that moment she swiped the card. Xavier seems impressed by her confession and asks her how she knew his password, to which she simply states that she watched the security cameras in his office. He points out that those cameras can't view the screen, and Cassia agrees. However, she lets him know that the cameras can view him looking at the sticky note he keeps on the underside of his desk, the one with the password on it, naturally. This time, Xavier bursts into laughter. After collecting himself, he thanks her for pointing out how easy it is to gain access to a secure network. He sarcastically adds that that's comforting. After a brief moment of awkwardness, Cassia points out that he still hasn't answered her question. Why does he choose to help her after what she did? Once again, he addresses her formally as Miss Penrose, and he tells her that to answer the question, it's best if he shares a little story, and so he begins. He reveals that his younger sister, Fiona, was always very close to him. She understood him better than his parents and many of his friends. It was easy to confide in her. But when she ran away from home at 17, it changed his entire world. For a moment, Xavier looks genuinely sad as he closes his eyes. He continues his story, explaining that he devoted his life to finding her, hoping to bring her home, all to no avail. He opens his eyes slowly, revealing deep sadness. Furthermore, he informs Cassia that Fiona has been missing for 15 years and that everything in his logic tells him she's never coming back because she never wanted to be found. Not only that, but he admits that he's not sure if she's even alive. For a brief moment, Cassia remains quiet, rendered speechless by the story. Finally, she finds her words and tells Xavier how sorry she is about his sister. In reply, he reveals that Fiona was a smart girl, but whatever she got wrapped up in must have been too big for her. In despair, he continues, saying that regardless of what he does, this job he has, the records he peruses, he doesn't think he'll ever discover the truth. He glances at Cassia and tells her he knows she's not Fiona, and that he's not trying to project his sister onto her. However, he says that if she has a brother out there who misses her like he misses Fiona, he would want to be the bridge for her to reunite with him. He expresses that he can't let his failure with his sister stop him from correcting another wrong in the universe. So if he can help just one person find their home, it might help mend the part of him that wishes he could have helped Fiona. Cassia admits that she's overwhelmed and doesn't know what to say. Xavier urges her to agree to let him help her and to give him her confidence, claiming it would make everything feel a bit more worthwhile. Cassia gives him a sad smile and agrees to make it a clean slate so they can start over. With that, they shake hands on it. Later that night, Cassia walks by a park and sees a child playing on a swing. She stops for a moment and watches, as though having a fleeting memory. In the memory, it's raining, and a little girl is swinging happily. Another memory flits in, and she sees the little girl on her knees, with a man standing over her and asking if she is scared. But just then, the memory flees her mind, and she can't seem to recall anything else. Cassia's eyes widen in shock, and she walks away, making her way to catch a train ride back home. On the ride, she tries to recall the memory she had by the park, but she can't remember more of it. She wishes she could recall more than mere glimpses. However, the man in that memory seemed important, and she can't figure out why. Suddenly, her eyes widen, and she finds herself in the vampire's castle. When she takes in her surrounding, she becomes thoroughly shaken because this time around, everything feels different. Cassie watches from the shadows as the vampire talks to another man. The man looks frustrated, saying they've had no luck finding the mirage. The vampire's voice is calm, commanding. He tells him to double the search party, go farther. Whoever they're hunting will run out of places to hide soon enough. Cassie holds her breath, but the man glances her way. She freezes. The vampire follows his gaze, his dark eyes locking on her. A flick of his hand and power slams into her, forcing her down into a glowing magic circle on the floor. He looks amused, tilting his head. His voice drips with sarcasm as he asks if she planned to waltz into his throne room today, dressed up like this. Cassie's thoughts race, wondering if he has this much control over her too now. The other man steps closer, glancing between them, and asks if she's the one. Cassie's annoyance bubbles over, and she snaps, saying she's fine with being tied up, but not into being passed around. The man stiffens, muttering about her lack of manners, while the vampire smirks, clearly entertained. He asks the man, Hagmar, if she's always this bold. Hagmar grumbles that she is, every bit as much as he warned. The vampire waves him off, telling him to leave. Hagmar obeys without argument, disappearing into the shadows. Alone now, the vampire's tone sharpens, his gaze burning into her. He reminds her she left him last night, even though he sealed her. That's a first, he says, and it'll also be the last. He calls her by name, his words cold and deliberate, saying she's a mystery, no mention of her in any record. Cassie clenches her fists, thinking bitterly how her real-life problems have now bled into her dreams. Cassie smirks and tells him they don't need to know each other for this whole thing to work, do they? The vampire's smile is sharp as he reminds her of their little moonlight meeting, saying he enjoyed it, but she won't catch him slipping like that again. He leans closer, his voice low, saying she'll give him answers unless she wants to keep playing this fruitless game forever. She tilts her head and asks if this is a game to him. His grin widens as he tells her it absolutely is, and she's quite bold to treat the king of vampires like this. Her stomach flips, and she apologizes quickly, saying she's not mocking him and definitely not playing games. He stares her down and asks what she's really after. She shrugs and says a good time. His fingers graze the front of his chest, and his voice hardens as he tells her about the marking they both share, one he didn't have until she appeared. She raises an eyebrow and says she hasn't given him anything. He calls her bold, coy, and reckless for talking like this when she's paralyzed on his floor. She says she's not playing coy, but he doesn't seem convinced. His gaze sharpens, and he demands to know where she came from. She answers Cavleton, but that only makes him angrier. He tells her there's no such place and asks if she's mocking him again. She frowns and asks if he hears that sound. His eyes narrow, and he says he hears nothing. Cassie's eyes snap open, her heart pounding. Her phone buzzes in her hand, and Xavier's message lights up the screen. He asks what she's doing for lunch tomorrow, says he has some promising new leads, and wonders if 11 works for her. New leads. If she had to wake up, at least it's for something that might help her memory. She quickly replies that her shift starts at 11, and her lunch break isn't until 1:15. He responds almost instantly, saying he has a meeting at 1, but will talk to her shift manager and sort something out. Don't worry, he says. I'll see you tomorrow. She types okay and stares at the screen for a moment before tossing her phone onto the couch. Her stomach sinks when she sees the letter on the counter. She tears it open and skims it, her chest tightening. Rent's gone up to $969 a month. Outstanding balance, $1,062. Due by August 15th. Eviction if unpaid. She checks her phone again and groans. It's already August 10th. She crumples the paper and tosses it onto the table, leaning against the counter with a heavy sigh. 5 days to come up with $1,000. Unless she plans to sell her body, which she doubts anyone would pay that much for, she's got nothing. Cassie watches Dr. Angela Sparks talking about dreams, how they might be random brain impulses or purposeful replays of memories. She talks about professionals helping decode them, mentioning psychiatrists like it's a sales pitch. Cassie's barely listening, distracted when her phone buzzes. She sees Meg's messages and realizes she forgot to reply. She wonders if she should tell her about the eviction letter, but decides against it. Meg asks about hot dog lunches. Cassie types, deletes, considers asking if she can crash at Meg's place, but erases that too. She replies about eating air. Meg says she's trying to lose weight. Cassie tells her she's a queen. Meg tells her to shut up. Cassie calls her dumb and says goodnight. Rain pours outside. She watches it streak down the window and remembers being in the park, someone asking if she's scared. It's just a voice now, distant and strange. The man asks if she's scared, saying it's okay to be. They talk for a while, his voice steady and kind. When they finish, he slips off his jacket and drapes it over her shoulders. Cassie feels a strange warmth, thinking how the rain seems to sharpen her memories lately. The moments are clearer now, but she can't place his face. Who is he, and how does she find him? For all she knows, he might not even be real. She falls asleep, and the dream finds her again. 4th time in a row. She's in the vampire's throne room, and he looks irritated. He says he'd offer her a drink, but after 2 failed attempts to catch her, he'd need the whole bottle. She laughs and tells him he looks upset. He asks what gave it away, and she says he looks like she feels. He insists he doesn't sulk, but admits she's left him out of ideas. He tells her she's free to go, since nothing he's done has worked. She smirks and says she could always pretend to be his prisoner if it would make him feel better. She says it can't be the first time someone's gotten the better of him and grabs his drink, adding that if anyone here needs to unwind, it's her. He watches her sip and tells her she's very powerful, but asks what she hopes to gain by making light of him. She blinks, surprised, and says she's not making light of him. She thought she was flirting. He looks stunned and asks if she's seriously claiming her interest is romantic. She grins, saying it started that way. But since he's more interested in interrogating her than being intimate, she's just been trying to avoid another round of questions. He looks so defeated now she can't help but pity him a little. His expression darkens, and he asks if this is about an heir. Does she want a son to take his throne? Is that why she's invaded his life? She bursts out laughing, calling it ridiculous. She doesn't want kids, and even if she did, she points out that since this is all a dream, it wouldn't happen anyway. His head tilts sharply and he asks what she means by a dream. She shrugs and says the whole thing, him, his throne, his failed attempts to keep her here. It's all in her head. At this point, she's fine admitting it. She chuckles, saying it doesn't matter because she can't wake up and get back in bed anyway. He watches her closely, his voice lowering as he asks if she truly believes she's dreaming. She nods, saying that she knows she is. He narrows his eyes and asks what kind of spell she's accusing him of. He's not dreaming. She smirks and repeats that she is. All of it, including him. She says yes. He leans in, studying her, and asks what she thinks he is to her. She tells him she watched a whole video on it before bed. He's a manifestation of her subconscious. He repeats her words slowly, asking if she truly believes he's just her subconscious appearing through dreams. She nods and says it's called lucid dreaming. He tilts his head, thinking, then says if that's true, her fearlessness makes more sense. Still, he points out that she's shattered every seal he's placed on her, so her power can't be ignored, dream or not. He insists, however, that as much as she believes herself to be dreaming, he is real. She shrugs and says he could say that, but no dream would ever admit to being a dream. He narrows his eyes and says if that's how she feels, he won't argue, though it's clear she thinks he's just a figment of her imagination. So be it. But he warns her that he won't stop until he has the answers he's seeking. He'll take whatever he wants from her whenever he wants it. She smirks and crosses her arms, daring him. She tells him to go ahead because she'd love to see him try. Cassie wakes up at 9:31, her head still buzzing from the dream. She thinks about how things got pretty intense before her phone ruined it. She wonders what might have happened if it hadn't gone off. A text from Xavier pops up. He says he couldn't convince her shift manager to adjust her schedule, but he's arranged for her to leave an hour early and wants to meet in the lobby at 6. He suggests grabbing dinner. She replies that she'll see him then. She wonders if it's a date. Probably not, she tells herself, even if it feels like one. Better not to make it weird by overthinking it. She reminds herself to just act normal. At 6:05, she sends Xavier a text apologizing for being late. Before she can even put her phone away, he shows up, smiling, and says he's running late too. He gives her a once-over and hesitates. She asks if something's wrong, and he awkwardly mentions that it looks like she's wearing yesterday's outfit. Her face heats up and she fumbles for a response. He quickly adds that it's no big deal. He should have told her they were going somewhere less casual than jeans and a t-shirt. She shrugs and says most of her wardrobe is jeans and t-shirts, so maybe they can hit a fast food place instead. He laughs, shaking his head, and says he has a reservation at Yoshi. Canceling there isn't exactly an option unless he wants to be blacklisted forever. She asks if she can just go as is. He thinks for a second and says his cousin lives nearby and she's about the same size. He'll call and ask her to bring a dress. The lady tells Xavier he's lucky she handles pressure like a pro. He thanks her and asks where Cassie is. She says she's on her way up, needed a minute in the bathroom, but she'll be here any second. He nods and mutters about hoping the hostess forgives him for not arriving 15 minutes early. The elevator dings and the lady glances over, saying that must be Cassie. She grins and adds that he owes her big time. He calls her a hero and says now comes the hard part, charming the hostess. Xavier turns as Cassie steps out and blinks like he wasn't expecting her to look like that. She asks if something's wrong again, or is she still not fancy enough for his overly fancy dinner? The lady laughs and tells her he's staring because she nailed it. She adds that with Cassie looking like that, the hostess should let them in without any trouble. Her job is done. Cassie grabs Xavier's arm and reminds him he said they were late. She tugs him toward the exit, saying she's not about to be the reason he gets blacklisted. They rush to the restaurant. Inside, Cassie's eyes dart around, landing on the menu. She sees her paycheck, water bill, and electric bill all on a plate. She reminds herself to stop thinking about food as bills. Xavier did say it was his treat, right? She exhales and sits as he pulls out a folder, calling her Miss Penrose in that mock formal way of his. He shows her some leads and says they might be worth looking into. She flips through the papers, seeing names and faces, but none of them spark anything familiar. She wonders if even knowing these people would feel like knowing them. She apologizes, saying she doesn't recognize any of them. Maybe they're relatives, but she has no clue how strong her amnesia is or how long it'll take to overcome it. Xavier shrugs and says it's fine. It was a stretch to think they'd hit the jackpot on day one anyway. He tells her to enjoy the meal and promises to keep scouring records for her. They'll find her family, he's sure of it. She thanks him, trying not to let the heaviness of the topic weigh her down as she picks at her plate. The waiter swings by and asks if they're enjoying everything. Xavier nods and she smiles, saying it's delicious, then asks for a refill. As she's mid-sentence, her words trail off. She freezes. Someone walks past the table and her heart skips. She recognizes him instantly. He's the man from her dream. Her mind races. It can't be him. Can it? Xavier notices she's distracted and asks if anything's wrong. She hesitates, then points to the waiter standing nearby, saying she thought he looked like someone she knew. The waiter steps forward, offering to call the other waiter for her. He quickly walks away, and the man, Steve, comes over, asking if he can help with anything. Cassie apologizes quickly, saying she was mistaken and thought he was someone else. Steve smiles, saying it's no problem, and walks off. Xavier asks if she's okay. She nods and says she's fine, just that Steve reminded her of someone she's been dreaming about, a boy with black hair. She wonders if he could be a relative, but she's not sure. Xavier chuckles and says he'll keep an eye out for black-haired men when he brings her the next batch of potential relatives. She thanks him for that and for the meal. She adds that she doesn't go out much, especially to places like this. For someone like her, it feels like a dream. She's just a janitor, living in a tiny apartment, scraping by with barely enough to cover rent. She starts to stop herself, feeling embarrassed. Xavier listens, saying he wanted to treat her to somewhere nice, thinking she'd enjoy it. He adds that it's a shame she's starting over with so little, especially when she's so young. He wishes there were better opportunities for her. Cassie shrugs, agreeing. Without any credentials, she's not sure what else she could do. She says she doesn't mind being a janitor, though. It's just that sometimes she feels like she used to be something bigger, or maybe she just wishes she was. She stops herself, saying enough of the pity party, and thanks him again for dinner. Meg asks how Cassie ended up at Yoshi. Cassie says an employee invited her for sushi. Meg wonders if it's a date, but Cassie only thinks they're friends, maybe something more down the road. Meg teases her, saying the guy must be rich if he's taking her to a fancy place. Cassie shrugs, explaining she hardly knows him, and they barely had time to hang out. Meg is shocked by Sean's behavior, calling him out for cock-blocking. Cassie jokes about what might happen if Meg gave the man a little of her charm, but Meg just laughs and says it could benefit them both. Cassie laughs but playfully threatens her. Meg switches topics, bringing up the Vampire King. Cassie admits she broke the reality of her dreams by calling him out as just a dream. Meg wonders why she'd do that, but Cassie doesn't mind. She hasn't gotten close to him anyway. Meg suggests Cassie focus on the rich guy instead, but Cassie doesn't bite. She's just looking good in her dreams. They say goodnight, promising to meet up tomorrow. The Vampire King tells her he was starting to think she wouldn't show up. Cassie points out how strange it is to see him again and asks where they are. He says they're in his manor. She's impressed by how beautiful it looks and notices the entire kingdom outside. Curiously, she asks about the floating lights. He casually explains they're blood wraiths. Feasting on the dead and dying, she sarcastically replies, "That's nice." He raises an eyebrow, wondering why she doesn't know about them since it's her dream. He asks if she can change anything in the dream, if she has control. She asks how she's supposed to do that. He suggests she try moving a mountain or creating a storm, challenging her to show him she can control it all. Cassie wonders if she even can. Cassie tries to see if she can control the place, but nothing happens. The Vampire King asks if something's wrong. She admits she might not be able to move mountains, so maybe she should start small, like controlling the weather. She attempts to make it rain, but it doesn't work. He says it looks like she can't change anything. She suggests that maybe it just means she's not dreaming, but that she's limiting her own subconscious. He agrees and apologizes for trying to make her his prisoner before, hoping they can move past it. She shrugs it off, saying it's just a dream and none of it matters. He asks if he can ask her some questions, and she agrees. He thanks her and suggests they take a walk. He starts asking about her, wondering what she is. A duchess? A mage? She laughs and says she's just a janitor. He's surprised and asks what that is. She explains it's someone who cleans up after people. He asks if it's like being a maid. She nods, saying it's close enough. He wonders how someone like her can escape the king of vampires. Either she's weak or lying. He asks what he should do about her, whether she has anyone to blame for her situation. She tells him she's sure she has parents somewhere, but she doesn't know who they are. She doesn't even know how old she is, but she figures she's old enough to live on her own. He's confused. How can she not know her parents or her age? She shrugs, saying she can't remember anything, just that her earliest memory is staring at a street sign in the rain. She was confused, wearing something fancy from another time, which she thinks might be tied to a fascination with the Renaissance. That, and somehow ending up in his dreams with no idea how she got there. Cassie wonders if, given the fancy clothes she was wearing, she was once someone important, maybe even wealthy. But she figures she was probably just abandoned because no one has ever come looking for her. She's been alone for months, trying to find a family that might not even want her, but she can't move on with her life until she knows who she is and what happened. He says he understands, and it sounds like a powerful spell might be at work. He doesn't believe she was just a maid, or that she was meant to stay one. She laughs, calling the spell explanation a fun way to cover up trauma. Her theory is that she was once someone with wealth and status, but she got caught up in something dangerous. Maybe she uncovered a family secret. Someone was hired to deal with her, rough her up, and leave her somewhere, and that's how she ended up with no memory. He listens thoughtfully, considering her story. He asks if there's a way she can show him the dress she was wearing when it happened. Maybe he can figure out what family or province she came from. She hesitates, then calls him Gray. He asks why she called him that, and she quickly apologizes, saying she just made it up because he never told her his name. He chuckles and says his name is Loxian, but she can call him Gray if she likes. He's curious about why she chose that name, and she shrugs, saying it just felt right, like something she'd been saying for a while. A flash of a fallen bird crosses her mind, but she shakes it off. She asks if he's really okay with her calling him Gray, and he says he'll allow it. Cassie then asks why he cares to know all this about her. He says he just wants to learn more to satisfy his curiosity, and if he's nothing more than a dream, maybe she'll indulge him. She shrugs, saying it's better than being interrogated. She jokes that if he wants to go back to their honeymoon tryst, she'd be persuaded. He asks if she's a promiscuous one, and she replies, "Only in my dreams." He wonders what would happen if he took advantage of her. She tells him to act like a gentleman. Did he forget how everything started? He says he remembers, but he's not usually so uninhibited. If he didn't think she was just a dream, he would have hesitated. She points out it's just a dream, so he can take whatever he wants. He asks if she really believes she's dreaming. She says she doesn't know what she's consenting to, but even a despicable monster like him must have some sense of etiquette. She wonders if he's really that into etiquette, and he calls her name, saying he knows it might be a joke, but he's determined to show her reality. When he gets the mirage, he'll take it. She asks what mirage, and he explains it's a powerful Nubilis mage, one of the most powerful, a master of dark arts. She says he sounds important, and he agrees. Then he says something's been bothering him since their last encounter. He asks if she thinks she can leave the dream whenever she wants, because she tends to wake up at inconvenient times. Is that on purpose? She tells him she just wakes up, usually because of an alarm. He asks if it's always like that. She admits there was one time when she woke up because she was afraid. He asks if she can leave whenever she wants and wonders if he should give her a fright to test it. She laughs, thinking he's not serious. He says they should see, and suddenly, a magic circle appears by the flock in the kingdom. She starts falling, shouting his name and asking what he's doing. Cassie starts shouting, but suddenly realizes she's floating, not falling. Lochian says it's impressive. She actually has some control. She wonders how she's doing it, asking if he's doing it. He tells her it's all her, then tries another spell. She screams again, but somehow breaks free. He compliments her, impressed again. She asks him to stop, telling him he nearly killed her. He wonders if she's not fascinated by herself, says what she just did is incredible. She admits it's a little fascinating, but she was just floating. She asks if she can move a mountain. He doubts it, but still says she should be impressed with what she's managed so far. She calls it a cool dream, but says it was rude of him to make her fall to her death, even if she can float. He asks what would scare her, but she says she's not sure. He wonders why she's suddenly so bashful, reminding her she's no stranger to promiscuity. She tells him she doesn't like the biting. His fangs are too sharp. He teases her, leaning in, but she insists no biting. She's serious. He says he's serious too, but a little thirsty. She says no, and before she can protest any further, he holds her neck, but she wakes up just in time. She thinks to herself that he stopped, but it really was a crazy dream. Two men are talking. One says it's been a long day, the other agrees, adding that he isn't kidding. The first one asks if he's going to barbecue tonight. The second replies, yes, and they keep talking. Cassie walks down the street, glancing at the clock, 7:08, August 12th. She heads toward the notice board and spots a job listing for personnel to assist in various departments at $20 an hour. She thinks she could really use that money, but she's probably underqualified. They likely want someone with a degree or at least some college. She figures she'd have better luck finding an even smaller apartment further out for less money. Just then, Xavier walks up to her, greeting her. She's surprised to see him, saying his shift was over hours ago. He agrees, but says he's been thinking about something. He mentions how close he came to convincing her she recognized that waiter at Yoshi. The fact that memories are resurfacing at all is a good sign, he says. He asks if she's considered seeking professional help to uncover more of those memories. She says, now that he mentions it, it does sound like a good idea. The memories have only been recent, but she doesn't think she can afford it. He tells her not to worry about the cost. The company offers free mental health resources. She won't have to pay a dime. He suggests she could give it a try. It might help her uncover more of her past. She agrees to think about it. He gives her the contact info for the lady, saying she can call and schedule an appointment whenever she's ready. She thanks him, saying no stress, and wishes him a good night. He smiles and walks away. A strange man approaches Cassie, calling her name and grabbing her hand. She asks if she knows him, but he just laughs and pulls her along. She tells him to let go. It's starting to hurt. He says he's finally found her after all these years. She hits him, demanding he let go. He laughs again, asking if she's forgotten him. She insists she doesn't know him. He says he's waited forever for this moment, that they could leave right now, go home. She asks where home is and who he is. He insists they should go home, that he'll shed his vessel, and they'll leave that place. She tells him to get off her, but another man walks up and tells him to let go. The first man says it's time and rips her top open, causing her to fall unconscious. She wakes up somewhere else and calls out for Gray. She wonders if the king of vampires is there and looks around, questioning if it's a dream. A voice answers, and she wonders who it was, realizing it wasn't Gray. She asks who's there, and a masked man walks toward her. She feels like she should recognize him, but doesn't. He tells her it's either a dream or a forgotten memory. He asks if she remembers him or if she's forgotten. She panics, telling him to stay back. He asks why, since she summoned him. Just like that, she wakes up. Cassie is back to reality and breathes a sigh of relief. Meg is there asking if she's okay. Cassie asks where the man went. Meg says she'll call a nurse, and does so, but Cassie keeps asking where the man is. She pulls Meg aside, asking again about the man. Meg looks confused, asking what man. Our female lead asks Meg what she means by what man, just as she sees someone walk into the room. It's Xavier. She asks what he's doing there. He says he heard the shouting and came over. He figured she was asking about the man who attacked her at the subway. Cassie almost loses it. How could she forget about the crazy guy from the subway? He's probably the reason she had that vivid dream about the second guy. She confirms it's the same man and asks what happened to him. Xavier explains that after she hit her head and passed out, the cops and paramedics were called. They restrained the attacker, and when they looked through her phone, they saw he was her most recent contact. He says he came to the hospital, then called Meg, thinking it'd be more comforting for her to wake up and see a familiar face. Cassie thanks him, saying that was thoughtful. Meg apologizes, saying she should have figured out who Cassie was talking about when she mentioned the man, but she was just so relieved Cassie was okay. Cassie tells her not to worry about it. They were both a little shaken up, and that's fine. Meg adds that she overheard the cops talking to the attacker. They think he was on drugs or something, acting like he was having an out-of-body experience. It was all really strange. Cassie agrees, saying it's definitely weird. She asks how long they've been waiting. Meg says about 2 hours, but Xavier got there first. Xavier says it's been 2.5 hours for him. Cassie thanks them both for sticking around, but it's the middle of the night, maybe even after midnight. She figures it's time to head out. Meg says that usually she'd smack Cassie for saying that, but since she just started moonlighting at this other company a few days ago, she'll let it slide. The night shift sucks, but it pays more, so if she leaves now, she can still make it to the start of her shift. She asks if Cassie's sure she's okay. Cassie says she is, and jokes that maybe Meg should check out the company too since she likes more pay. Gotta make that paper. Meg laughs and says to text her later. She'll see Cassie on Monday or Tuesday and tells her to take care of herself before leaving. Xavier says Cassie's lucky to have a good friend like that. She agrees, then tells him he doesn't have to stick around. He says he's got all night, nowhere to be. Besides, he could look into the guy from the subway, see if there are any connections that might help her figure out more about who she is and where she's from. Cassie thinks that sounds great and thanks him. He suggests there's probably a trauma counselor on the ward who could help her talk through what happened. She says it's fine, but he insists, just in case it's not. He tells her she can always talk to him if that's easier. Cassie insists she doesn't need to talk to anyone and asks him to go home. She'll be fine. He says if that's what she wants, he'll respect it. He gets up to leave. She calls him back, thanks him for coming when he didn't have to, and he says anytime. He's just a phone call away and tells her goodnight. The next day, Cassie sees Dr. Sandra Muldrow. The doctor asks if what Cassie's saying is her best recollection of what happened. Cassie thinks she might have hallucinated, or that her dream after the attack blurred her memory. Dr. Muldrow says it's perfectly natural for that to happen. Cassie mentions the crazy guy's eyes glowing, and Dr. Muldrow asks if her chest was glowing too. Cassie wonders if that's part of the memory blur. The doctor says she thinks she knows the answer to that. Cassie admits it sounds a bit crazy, and she's sorry for it, but she feels like she's losing grip on reality. The dreams have been so bizarre. The doctor explains that recurring dreams often feature the same character. The voice she calls Gray has been there, but after the attack, a new character showed up. Aside from the scare yesterday, all her interactions with Gray have been pleasant. Cassie says sometimes Gray tries to capture her, but the last time wasn't really dangerous, just scary because he wasn't there. She's come to trust him, even if it sounds strange. If she's not getting sleep, at least she's comforted by his presence. The doctor nods, saying it's understandable to be afraid in a situation like that. She asks if Cassie slept since her last encounter with the new character, and Cassie admits she hasn't, too afraid to sleep. The doctor suggests that Gray seems like a manifestation of Cassie's subconscious. He might be there to give her some control or power, since she feels so helpless in the waking world with her memory loss. After the traumatic experience at the train station, Cassie might be struggling to regain control. That's why Gray wasn't around. She advises Cassie to go home and rest. If she sees the new man again, she should ask him what he wants. It could give her some insight into her mental state. The doctor recommends weekly therapy sessions and says in time, she might find her dreams changing as she grows to accept herself. Our girl asks about her amnesia, wondering if there's a connection. She asks if Gray or the new man might know what memories are locked away. The doctor says it's possible. As time goes on, new characters might appear and offer clues about her lost memories. They'll take it one step at a time, but for now, she should rest, speak to Gray, and take care of herself. The receptionist will call her tomorrow to schedule the next appointment. Cassie gets home and tries to rest. She tells herself that if things go wrong, she'll need a way out, so her alarm can't fail her. 30 minutes should be enough. It'll be her emergency wake-up call. She falls asleep. She asks herself if she's with Gray when the masked man appears. He says he knows she has somewhere else to be, but he has the faintest connection to her projection. And if he's being honest, he likes to meddle. Chapter 15. Cassie asks the masked man who he is. He says that's not important, but a better question is who she is. She tells him her name. She asks what he wants from her, but he says he's not done asking questions, so she'll have to wait. She tells him that it's her dream, so she'll call the shots. He asks if that's so, then adds that she's not the only mage who can cast illusions. He takes her to a pool of water. She asks how he's doing it. He says it took a lot of power to reach her, and he can't keep the connection intact for long, so she'd better cooperate before it's cut off. She says he's making no sense. He asks how they know each other. Are they enemies, friends, or something more? He says there's something familiar in her eyes, and it's a shame he's losing the connection already. He's waited too long to see what mysteries are locked in her mind. Before they lose touch, he'll take a parting gift. Suddenly, flashes of someone saying her brother is gone and a dead bird appear. She falls into the pool of water. She asks where Gray is, where she is, then wakes up. Her chest is glowing, and she falls down. She tries to stand up, telling herself not to freak out and to breathe. She can't pass out, but she falls again. She grabs her phone and calls Dr. Sandra, saying she thinks she's hallucinating. The doctor asks if she's okay, and Cassie says she's not. She tells her about the dream, the man touching her head, the images she saw, and the weird marking on her chest that's still glowing when she wakes up. The doctor tells her to calm down and asks if she can still see the glowing marks. Cassie says she can. The doctor asks if she's sure she's not dreaming. Cassie hesitates, unsure. The doctor suggests she might need medication, a low dose for hallucinations and panic attacks, but it could make her drowsy. She's not sure if that's what Cassie wants. Cassie tells the doctor she doesn't know and asks if they can meet the next morning to talk. The doctor says she'd prefer that, but reminds her to call someone she trusts if she has another panic attack. Cassie thanks her and asks if 10 works for the meeting. The doctor confirms and Cassie agrees. As she hangs up, Cassie thinks to herself that she's too scared to sleep. She's afraid she'll wake up with that man again, but she knows she has to sleep eventually. She just hopes Gray will be there. She thinks about calling Meg but ends up dialing Xavier instead. He picks up and asks if she's all right. Cassie tells him she thinks she's in real trouble and asks if they can meet. Xavier tells her to make herself comfortable, saying he just needs to sort out a few things before they can head out for a bite to eat. Cassie thinks to herself that this is where he lives. She can barely afford her rent, and he's living in a penthouse. What kind of salary does he even have? Is his family rich? Maybe he's secretly a prince. Must be nice. Xavier says he's all settled now and apologizes for dragging her to his place, but they can head out whenever she's ready. She apologizes for disturbing him, knowing he's probably trying to enjoy his day off. He reassures her it's fine, saying she needs someone who can help, and he doesn't mind being that person. He asks if Meg didn't reach out to her. Cassie says it's not Meg's fault. She never told her about her amnesia, and it feels weird that the one person she's closest to doesn't know something so important. Xavier asks why she hasn't told Meg yet, if she doesn't mind him asking. Our girl explains they haven't known each other long, and she didn't want to scare Meg off. She didn't want to seem too strange by telling someone she has amnesia. If Xavier hadn't figured it out, she's sure she wouldn't have told him either. Now, with these crazy dreams turning into nightmares and the stress over rent, she feels like a mess. She doesn't want Meg to think she's a freak. Xavier reassures her she's not a mess, and it's okay to feel like she can't trust Meg with something so personal. But he's glad she's trusting him. He's someone who can help. And she's already taken the first step by scheduling that appointment with the psychiatrist. He thinks it's a great move, and her mind will eventually reveal its secrets. Cassie asks if he really thinks so. He smiles and says he knows so. Xavier says she looks exhausted and knows she's scared to fall asleep, but he's genuinely concerned for her. He asks if she'd consider resting, and if it's too out of place, he offers her his bed to sleep in. Cassie immediately says that's out of place. She can't possibly sleep there. He tells her he could monitor her, and if she looked like she was having a nightmare, he'd wake her up. She says well, but he insists he doesn't mean to impose. He just wants her to be comfortable. He's really worried about her, and if she can't sleep, they could go over some potential relatives. She asks if he found more, and he says yes, more black-haired people, hoping one of them might trigger her memories. Our girl feels unbelievably exhausted. She's barely had time to sleep lately, and she knows the panic attacks and hallucinations are probably from that. She has about 10 minutes before Xavier gets back, so maybe she can rest her eyes, though she knows it won't be enough time to fall asleep. She finds herself in the dream and thinks to herself that she must have finally fallen asleep. Locian greets her, saying it's been a while and asks if she's still mad at him. Cassie runs over and hugs him tightly. He asks if that means she's not angry anymore, and she apologizes, feeling relieved. She tells him it feels like it's been weeks since she saw him, but it's only been one night. She thought her dreams were just about him, but recently she's been visiting other places and meeting other people. Locian asks who, and she says she doesn't know. The person was wearing a strange mask. And like him, he was very interested in asking her personal questions. She doesn't even know who she is, so no one else could either. He asks if the masked man tried to hurt her. Cassie says not exactly, but he used magic. Locian says magic is only used by mages or nobility, so the man is probably someone powerful. He asks if Cassie intended to visit him, or if the man orchestrated the encounter. If he did, what hold does he have over her to make her appear there? She asks what he means, and Locian wonders if the man identified himself. He asks if he's an elf, and Cassie says she couldn't possibly know that. Then Locian calls her name and asks if she's met the Mirage. There's still a lot to uncover in this story. Want to see part 3? Comment vampire below. Also, please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, ciao!